and a Golden Angel Award ceremony.
Hello, dear friends, my lovely audiences, brothers, sisters, and my dear fellow Americans. Welcome to the East-West show that is exclusively sponsored by Wolfers, the Belgian royal family designated brand of jewelry with 400 years of glorious history and hand-forged by 10 generations of the master craftsmen on the global earth. Together, the name of Wolfers stands for a testimony to the spectacular and the share of the royal glory. To the show. Today with me is my dear friend, I believe a big friend of the community, former presidential consultant for President Bush 41 and President Bush 43, and founder and the CEO of the Lee Strategy Group, a great man, Honorable James Lee.
Thank you very much for letting me be here.
Welcome, sir, to the show.
Always a good time.
Right, good. Like I said, every time when I have to get you here, I say that I have a crying baby on hand. Mm-hmm. So the best way to handle is to bring crying baby to the mother. So in this case, I have to ask you for help for the crying baby. The crying baby being that on the news perspective, of course, everybody is informed about what's going on with the impeachment, with the anti-impeachment, with so on and so forth. These two parties are fighting like a dog fight. However, beneath, to peel the onions layer by layer though, on the core, I really want to, on behalf of my audiences, find out what's going on to the beautiful country that I came for, to the beautiful country everybody loves so much, to the beautiful country I pledge my allegiance. So, sir, I need you, please.
Well, obviously, I think a lot of Americans are a little bit confused by the impeachment process. From the Democratic perspective, there's obviously, especially in the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, there was a lot of urgency to move on with impeachment because, frankly, for them, getting rid of President Trump is their absolute top priority. And they prefer not to wait for the uncertainty of the election in 2020. They prefer to get him out. And to be honest, they've been talking about this ever since he was inaugurated. So it's not surprising that they moved ahead with the impeachment process. I think it is a little bit surprising that they chose these particular articles to move forward with, since they had tried to establish a whole series of different actions against the president that he could be impeached for. But at the end of the day, they moved forward what they thought they could get and hold together a coalition to get the votes necessary in the House of Representatives, which they did. And President Trump is impeached on these two articles for obstruction of Congress and moving forward. The decision now is whether or not these articles are going to be forwarded on to the Senate, because that's where the trial actually occurs. Speaker Pelosi has decided not to send the articles right away. They're now trying to establish this message point that they want a fair trial, so they want to be able to call witnesses that they were not able to get on the House side. And the president has said that he wants to call witnesses as well, such as Vice President Biden and his son. And Republicans are reluctant to do that because that opens up the whole barrel. So there's a stalemate right now as we move through the Christmas recess. There's some practical political issues that have to be resolved first, including the timing of a Senate trial, because if they move forward with a Senate trial, part of the problem is that certain senators that are on the campaign trail, such as Senator Warren, Senator Sanders, and Senator Klobuchar, and Senator Booker, would have to come back in Washington and sit as jurors in that trial, and that would take them off the campaign trail at precisely the same time that the Iowa caucuses and the New Hampshire primary are ongoing. So there's a lot of consideration as to how the stuff is going to fold out, and that I think that leads a little bit to the confusion for the American people, because the supposition has always been that the House would impeach and the Senate would vote not to throw out the president because it's Republican controlled. So that's pretty much where we're at today. So if you were to ask me what happens on January 2nd, I probably would not be able to tell you, because I think a lot of people are still waiting to see what Speaker Pelosi's next move is.
All right, thank you very much for the initial analysis about the general picture. But behind the general picture, the biggest question that Americans are asking is that there are 53 of Republicans on the Senate, and 45 on the Democrat. So you're talking about 8 votes more than the Democrat. On the other hand, you're talking about 63 votes, 66, 6 votes to go with the super majority.
Right.
And I mean, in the mind of Democrats, do they know that is a mission impossible?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, most Democrats in the Senate and even in the House acknowledge that the odds of actually passage in the Senate for removal of the president were a long shot. I think the purpose in the impeachment is to embarrass the president, to damage him politically going into 2020. And, you know, I think there's a historical interest on the part of progressives to tag him as a president that's been impeached, because, you know, there have only been impeachment proceedings moved forward by against now the 4th president in U.S. history. So from a practical standpoint, I'm not sure at the end of the day what it does. I don't think it really changes the calculus of the election, because I mean, let's face it, there are very few undecided voters left in America. I mean, I can't imagine that there are very many people who don't have an opinion about Donald Trump right now, except maybe a couple fishermen up in Alaska. But, you know, because of that, I'm not sure it really moves the needle one way or the other. And you just have to look at the roadmap in the Clinton impeachment back in 1999, how that damaged Republicans who moved forward with the impeachment in that case. Where he was later acquitted in the Senate. So I'm not sure the Democrats will profit politically speaking, because at the end of the day, the quality of the Democratic nominee, whoever that may be, is going to be the only issue that matters against President Trump.
All right. It looks like they do know how much vote they will get. And with that kind of vote, it will never pass. Almost a zero.
Well, yeah,
chance.
Not for the required majority, that the supermajority they need. I mean, the Democrats have been trying to apply pressure on certain moderate Republicans that are up for re-election. For example, like Susan Collins of Maine, Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, made a brief mention last week to the media about how she was uncomfortable about Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's coordination with the White House on the impeachment trial. So the Democrats are hoping they might be able to peel off 1 or 2 Republicans to give it the appearance of a bipartisan impeachment vote, but I don't think anyone expects that they'll be able to peel off enough Republicans to actually move forward with the articles. And the flip side of it is that there are certain Democrats that are in heavily purple states that are also having some difficulties voting for impeachment, because it would adversely affect their reelection chances. So at the end of the day, I think the majorities are going to stay the same, and the vote count is going to be fairly predictable, with the variation maybe 1 or 2, and that's about it.
All right. But sharply, we see the comparison between the previous urgency and right now the reluctancy in handing in the article, right?
Yeah. I mean, the House moved swiftly, to say the least.
With an urgency.
Yeah, there was definitely a sense of urgency on the part of the Democrats to get this done before Christmas. They want to get it done before the holiday recess. If I recall correctly, this is the fastest House impeachment trial that's ever occurred in U.S. history. So, you know, the fact that they move so quickly and now they won't even send the articles over to the Senate, obviously it's a bit of a contradiction, and that just adds a little bit more to the confusion of the matter. Because if you were in such a rush to impeach him, then why not just get on with the trial?
Now, will the public, I mean, the public at large, see the attempt, see the strategy of Democrats?
Well, I like I said before, I don't think this really changes voters' minds very much. Depending on which poll you look at, the range of people who support impeachment range from 48 to 52, 53%. So, half the country wants to impeach the president. When you ask the question, not just about impeachment, but actually removed from office, that number drops below 45%. So there's a desire to impeach the president, but not necessarily kick him out of office, because I think a lot of people view that as a disruptive force in the economy, which is going so well, and especially with the uncertainty, the fact that I think a lot of voters say, look, there's an election next year. I mean, we've never had an impeachment process happen in an election year. So if you want to get rid of President Trump, just go to the ballot box and vote him out.
Roughly, can we say this? Do the Democrats understand it is almost impossible to take Donald Trump out of office, and yet they are still doing it for the slowdown, or for the obstacles, for whatsoever?
I think part of it is that, look, I mean, impeachment is a political process. It's not a legal process. If it was a legal process, it'd be handled by the Supreme Court. But it's in the House and the Senate, so it's a political process. That's what the Founding Fathers built it as. Because of that, because it is a political process, I think that when you look at most Democrats, especially progressive Democrats, not to sugarcoat it, but they despise Donald Trump on a personal level. And there are many things that the president does that are frankly repulsive to most Americans, whether or not it's some of his tweets, some of his actions, some of the way he refers to people and so forth. So I think for Democrats, this is a deeply personal issue for them. It is an issue which they feel very passionate about. And it's an issue that for them, they want to move forward on it as aggressively and as quickly as possible. So, again, for the average voter, especially the block of independent voters out there, I don't think it really changes their opinion very much, which is why I don't think there's a lot of pressure to actually, toss the president out of office.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. Today with me is my dear friend, a big friend to the community and to EDI. Of course, personally, I regard him as my big brother, Honorable James Lee, former presidential consultant for both George Bush and George H.W. Bush, 41 and 43. And I'm getting professional answers to questions that get me so mystified. So let's take a moment now. When we come back, we'll continue, peel another layer of the onion, please.
And a Golden Angel Award ceremony.
Hello, dear friends, my lovely audiences. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show, Jack Chow on the East West, exclusively sponsored by Wolfers, the Belgium royal family designated brand of jewelry with 400 years of glorious history and hand-forged by 10 generations of the #1 craftsman on earth. Together, the name Wolfers stands for testimony to the spectacular and the share of the royal glory. Back to the show. Today with me is a wonderful individual and a big friend to me, myself, the former presidential consultant to both George Bush, George H.W. Bush, 41 and 43. At that higher level position, of course, the political science, I call it political science now, can be easier for us to understand. Welcome back to you, sir. Question, right? Now, knowingly that they cannot succeed with the impeachment, and unknowingly this will not drag Donald Trump down that much, though. I mean, for credit, for payback, what does the Democrat get?
Well, I think it just satisfies their base. I mean, their base, especially the progressive part of the part of the party, is so exercised about President Trump that any effort to take him down is worthwhile. And certainly impeachment is a major historical type of action. So they certainly want to tar him with that legacy that he was an impeached president. So Bill Clinton was an impeached president. I don't think it really altered the trajectory of his presidency. I think that at the end of the day, the ballot box is going to be the deciding factor as to whether or not an impeachment is the right choice. And I think the problem for the Democrats is that if you look at pre and post impeachment hearings, especially in the key battleground states of Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, and so forth, the president went into the impeachment process mostly trailing the top 5 Democratic potential nominees. After the House vote and post-impeachment, he is now ahead of every single one of them in every single one of the battleground states. So you've effectively seen anywhere from a 5 to 10 point swing over impeachment in these battleground states. And that's a bad trend for Democrats politically. I think they recognize that. I think Speaker Pelosi's pause and not sending the articles over to the Senate is their attempt to try to get a little bit of a breather to figure out what their next step is. Because the political calculation from a practical standpoint doesn't help them. I mean, it helps them in places like California and Massachusetts and New York, but they don't need help there.
Speaking of their base, though, of course it will benefit their base. It will make their members or their side see so clearly how determined the base shall be, right? However, to the public, to the general public, though, after they see lots of investigation finding nothing, even with the report, even with the script whatsoever, finding nothing. And then now they see the urgency within the House versus the reluctancy right now in handing. Would the general public see that there's something, excuse me if I use a wrong term politically, is that something dirty?
No, I mean, look, it's politics, and in politics in America, everything is fair. So
can be dirty.
Well, I hesitate to use that word because I would prefer to, let's say that, the Democrats play hardball politics, and that's just the way the rules are set up. And
by the way, I'm not a supporter to Trump.
I understand.
Yeah.
And so I think that for Democrats, they're taking their best shot in the hopes of damaging the president to help their nominee in 2020. Only time will tell whether or not that strategy will work. I personally don't think it will, but they don't have a lot of great options right now, so they're going to do the best they can with what they have.
On the other hand, though, what does the Republican and Donald Trump get? Either benefit or damage?
Well, I mean, it certainly damages the president from a historical perspective. From a practical political perspective, I'm not sure it really does a heck of a lot because we've seen the president's base of support, frankly, never waver over God knows how many offensive tweets he sent out or how many statements he's made or how many questionable decisions he's made. At the end of the day, as James Carville, the Democratic political consultant, famously said, it's the economy, stupid. And the economy right now is going very strong. Unemployment is at a record low. Interest rates at a record low. And the stock market is at a record high. So, just this past Christmas season, we've seen retail sales and online sales all hit historic highs. So, the consumer confidence is at a high as well. So, I think all the impeachment process does is energize the president's base to a fever pitch. Not that they weren't devoted before, but I also think for independent voters, there's a certain amount of, frankly, Trump fatigue in America. People just don't want to hear from him or hear about him or hear about investigating him or hear about all these other issues. The fact that we've had so many investigations, between Mueller and Russia and Ukraine and stuff like that. And I think at the end of the day, the fact that no criminal indictment's ever been brought against the president largely because you can't bring a criminal indictment against the sitting president, just leads most Americans to scratch their heads and say, can we just get on with our lives? Obviously, for Democrats, it is extremely upsetting for them to even see or hear the president all the time, so they want to do everything they can. And I think for independent voters, they just want to get to 2020 and get it over with, frankly. I think that for them, that's the sentiment.
We all know that as president of the United States, he has certain immunities.
Yeah.
Does that fall in the ballpark of immunity?
Well, his only immunity is immunity from criminal prosecution. Now, that doesn't apply after he leaves office, which is kind of a moot point for Democrats, because if he were to leave office, then yeah, you can go ahead and go after him. But if you wanted him out of office, he's out of office, either the ballot box or because the second term is over. So I don't really think that there's anything that you can really do to the president legally, you can do to him politically, and that's the course the Democrats have chosen to take.
So that's why all the actions are within the range of a political tactics.
Yeah, I mean, the impeachment process, like I said, is a political process. It's not a legal process. And, the guidelines are very clear in the Justice Department that you can't indict a sitting president.
Speaking of who benefits, though, would this thing benefit Joe Biden? Because it looks that everything's surrounded with Joe Biden in the center and his son.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of discussion, debate as to, like, for the Democrats, especially among the Democratic nominees, who benefits the most from impeachment. You could argue that because of the delay in sending the articles of the Senate and the Senate trial starting later, that Joe Biden is the biggest recipient because his chief senatorial competition are going to be in Washington while he's free to be in Iowa and in New Hampshire. The same applies for Mayor Pete Buttigieg, because he would also be free on the campaign trail without having to deal with his Senate opponents. So the Senate trial itself is difficult for the Senate presidential candidates, Sanders, Warren, and Booker, and Klobuchar, because while in the Senate session hearing evidence, there are no cameras allowed, and you cannot speak or ask questions. So the only time that you're able to address the press is after session, when you come outside in a media scrum. So, and at that point, all four senators are competing for the same media time. So I don't think it really benefits them to be down in Washington and off the campaign trail. So, as to whether or not Vice President Biden is helped or hindered by impeachment, I honestly think it helps a little bit in clearing the field for him. But obviously, if the president and the Republicans agree to allow witnesses, it could be potentially very problematic and damaging for the vice president. He might be asked to be subpoenaed to testify. Now, he's already said, as of I think this weekend, that if he was served a subpoena by the Senate to testify, he would refuse it. So, I'm not sure what his son Hunter.
In other words,
do as well.
will benefit him very little.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what the upside is for Vice President Biden. I'm sure for Vice President Biden, he would prefer to talk about health care. He would prefer to talk about gun control. He would prefer to talk about, a whole host of other issues other than the impeachment.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. Today, I'm getting to the point of understanding what's going on now in this lovely country. With me today is my big friend also to the community, former presidential candidate. I'm a presidential consultant to both President George Bush and George H.W. Bush, 41 and 43. Let's take a short moment now. When we come back, I still have more questions. I'm kind of loaded with questions, so stay with us.
better to understand that we have to continue to work on it now. My name is Paul James. I host English News every morning.
And a Golden Angel Award ceremony.
Hello, dear friends, lovely audiences, ladies and gentlemen, my dear fellow Americans. Of course, we all care about this country. We all care about what's going on in this country because we love this country so much. Lots of people came here for the freedom at the cost of their own life. There's lots of people died halfway. It is a country worth trying, worth the risk. And anyway, the more that is a fact, the more we want to find out what's going on in this lovely country. Today with me is my big friend to the community, Honorable Mr. James Lee, founder and CEO of the Lee Strategy Group, former presidential consultant for George W. Bush, that's George H.W. Bush, 41 and 43, to answer the questions. For so many years working by the side of both presidents, though, he must know the best to the American quote-unquote politics. Right? Yeah. Now, speaking of politics, it is a game. Lots of people call game, right? Mm-hmm. And when you play game, there are rules, right? Well, rules and the games. You cannot change the rules, but you can change the way you play your games. Now, suppose, now that we understand the Democrats tries to defamate, if I use the right word or wrong word, I don't know, the incumbent. And suppose luckily he succeeded with his re-election. And then we know also the impeachment is a lengthy process. So after the election, when he is re-elected though, will this process go on?
Well, I mean, you know, the House Democrats have already said that, you know, this might not be the only impeachment, that if new evidence were to surface, they would submit new articles of impeachment. So, you know, they're certainly able to do that. Does it make sense politically? I don't think so. But, you know, I mean, they're so passionate about trying to get the president out or damaging the president that, I mean, even in the most Pyrrhic of victories, they would go after him, even though it might cost them a lot politically. Because if the American public is fatigued by one impeachment, I can't imagine they would welcome a second or third or fourth impeachment effort. So, you know, obviously, if President Trump is victorious at the ballot box next year and beats the Democratic nominee, I hesitate to try to think about what Democrats might do in response. I think also a lot of it depends on what happens in the down ballot races. I mean, do the Democrats lose seats in the House as a result, or do they gain seats in the House? Does the Senate stay in Republican hands, or does it go into the hands of the Democrats? I think all those factors will ultimately determine Democratic strategy moving forward if the president were to be reelected. Worst case scenario for the Democrats is obviously President Trump gets reelected. They lose seats in the House and they lose seats in the Senate. That would be dismal for the Democrats. So the potential for moving forward with additional articles of impeachment would be almost impossible for them.
We have experienced a period of time when Donald Trump was not earning or was not winning his total support of his own party. Now the rate of the support of his own party is increasing fast. So does that mean is being helped by the impeachment?
I think that, first of all, Donald Trump's coalition when he won for president included not just Republicans, but a healthy amount of disenfranchised Democrats, primarily white suburban Democrats from battleground states and rural areas. So that coalition is still fairly intact. Now, there obviously have been a lot of dissatisfied Republicans with President Trump because there are a lot of steps and actions he's taken that, frankly, are not part of Republican orthodoxy for the last 40 years. So, and I think that's in large part because of the fact that that President Trump, prior to becoming a Republican, was a Democrat for most of his life. So he still has some Democratic tendencies on certain issues. And then for Republicans, that makes like traditional Republicans like myself a little bit squishy about supporting him in a lot of issues. But we also recognize that he's the current leader of the party. He is the only nominee we have, and that for all his liabilities, he still has enormous political capital and political strength, which unites his coalition right now. Unfortunately for the Democrats, the Democratic nominees have not been able to kind of drive a wedge into that coalition yet. They haven't made a lot of inroads in that disenfranchised bloc of white Democrats, especially blue-collar Democrats, union labor Democrats that have had a difficult time supporting any of the Democrat candidates, especially the most progressive ones, because that kind of runs counter to some of their core values. So for Republicans, I think for practical matters, we support the party's nominee. We kind of wish the president maybe didn't tweet as much.
Interesting.
But we certainly, in comparison with what the Democrats are offering, there's almost no appetite for supporting any Democrat that's currently on the ticket right now.
That said, of course, we all experienced the period when the Republicans were so divided at one time, at least, right? And now that we see, on the other hand, that with the only candidate from Republicans, though, and being impeached so heavily, though, does that mean it helps the Republican Party to be united?
Well, I mean, I think that if the president had committed a criminal offense to a point where there was a smoking gun, there was evidence that convinced a lot of Republicans that he acted in a heinous way, similar to, for example, to what happened with President Nixon, then yeah, I think you would see a break in some of the support for him. The difficulties of the case the Democrats have presented as part of the impeachment process has not convinced very many Republicans or even very many independents that what the president has done is anything other than political, and that the action towards the president is anything else but political. And I think that's been the weakest point about the impeachment process, is that from the get-go it's been viewed as a political, not legal exercise. And I think the Democrats hurt themselves in the process by not trying to make this more bipartisan. Now, to their defense, they would say if we made it more bipartisan, Republicans would sabotage the process to protect the president, and there wouldn't be any true crossover. So at the end of the day, then you have to ask yourself, why move forward with the impeachment process, and instead of focusing on trying to win the 2020 election and take the president out of the ballot box. I don't know at the end of the day whether or not a Senate trial that is not televised helps the Democrats. That's part of the biggest problem, is that no one is going to be able to see what's going on in the Senate.
Can we see this? That even though this thing will not or is not helping Republican a lot, it does hurt Democrats.
Well, I mean, like I said, if you look at Clinton in '99, very clearly, it kind of showed that in that process, his impeachment hurt hurt Republicans. Newt Gingrich was no longer going to be the Speaker. The House flipped, so it was a definite issue for them. Now, Democrats will tell you that Clinton and Trump are totally different impeachment processes and that the politics are different. But I'm not sure from a historical standpoint that's the case, because I think in Clinton's case, the American people really didn't see what he did as an impeachable offense. And for a lot of Americans right now who view what happened in the Ukraine case, the phone call, because the transcripts have been released. I mean, you can go online and read it yourself. So again, there's not a lot of belief that this is high crimes and misdemeanors. So at the end of the day, I think it's a political act. It's viewed as a political act by most Americans. People kind of chalk it up. It doesn't move the needle in any way. If you supported President Trump, you will continue to support President Trump. If you opposed the president, you will continue to oppose the president. So it's not going to really change the terms.
All right. Thank you very much for your analysis. I think we're getting there step by step. Thank you very, very so much. My dear friends, today, with the help of my big friend, Honorable James Lee, former presidential consultant for both George Bush 41 and George Bush 43. And of course, at that level, there's no way you don't see the core of the political games, right? And also, he is the founder and the CEO of Lee Strategy Consultation Group. And by the way, this is your business time because everybody needs you, right? All right, let's take a short moment out. We come back to continue for our final segment. Stay with us.
Everything we have continued to work on it now. My name is Paul James. I host English News every morning.
And a Golden Angel Award ceremony.
Hello, dear friends, my lovely audiences. Welcome back to the show, to the East West, that is exclusively sponsored by Wolfers, the Belgian royal family designated brand of jewelry with 400 years of glorious history and hand-forged by 10 generations of #1 craftsmen on the global earth. Together, the name of Wolfers stands for a testimony to the spectacular and the share of the royal glory. Back to the show. Today with me is my dear friend and lovely friend to the community, a big man, Mr. Honorable James Lee, founder and CEO of Lee Strategy Consultation Group, and also former presidential consultant for both George Bush 41 and George Bush 43. So back to the core. You mentioned a comparison of the previous impeachment with
President Clinton.
President Bill Clinton, and with former President James who.
Richard Nixon?
Yeah, Richard Nixon.
Yes.
Of Loma Linda, right? Okay, now, so to compare the three, though, whose offense? I mean, whose commitment, whose offense, or whose articles are the? I mean, I don't know which is the crime, which is the mistake, which is a misdemeanor?
Well,
who is more serious?
I mean,
Put it that way.
if you look at the history of presidential impeachments, I mean, the first presidential impeachment proceeding was against President Andrew Johnson after President Lincoln was assassinated in the Civil War Reconstruction. His articles of impeachment, the first time they were brought, were principally because of deep corruption within the administration over Reconstruction in the South after the Civil War. And that actually moved from the House into the Senate. And President Johnson's case, he had almost no political supporters. He was a widely despised president in Washington. So that kind of set the bar for how presidential impeachments were going to work. You flash forward almost 100 years until President Nixon's impeachment, in which case the Watergate hearings kind of set the stage about a systemic effort coordinated by the White House to spy on Democratic opponents and use the national security and espionage apparatus of the U.S. government to conduct those episodes. Plus, it was taped. So you have the president on record in the cover-up and conspiracy.
Yeah, it was taped, yes.
So even before the House moved forward in introducing the articles, the president decided to resign because he knew what was going to be the outcome. And that was a bipartisan effort. The Watergate hearings were done in a bipartisan effort, and that kind of set the standard of what the modern impeachment was going to look like. By the time you get to President Clinton in his impeachment, with the difficulty that we had in that one was that he was accused of having an affair, and the impeachment article related to the fact that he allegedly lied about having that affair, and that is the sole basis for moving forward with the articles. And I think for most Americans, they kind of looked at that and said, that's not a high crime or a misdemeanor. So even though the House voted it through because the Republicans control the House, it went into the Senate and did not pass in the Senate because the Republicans cannot get the supermajority there. So, and that was also a impeachment process that was not bipartisan. It was all Republican led at that time, and the resulting political fallout was that it hurt Republicans out of the ballot box. This impeachment effort is similar to the Clinton impeachment effort in that it is not bipartisan, and it's a divided House and Senate where the outcome in the Senate is probably what's going to happen. So that leads to the question is that why pursue it in the first place? And I think that most Americans kind of understand the difference, and they kind of understand that yes, President Trump is personally an objectionable and offensive person in a lot of ways, but in terms of the conduct of his office and the state of the economy and where things are at in the U.S. right now, I don't find this particular reason sufficient to go ahead and toss him out of office.
At the end of the day, we're talking about three comparisons. We're talking about spying, we're talking about having an affair and the lie, and we're talking about
graft corruption,
abuse of power.
Yeah.
Right? So, all the three, though, for all the three, my question, question to the general public is that which was or is serious, more serious?
Well, the difficulty is that, this all rests on one phone call with the Ukrainian president by President Trump, and the transcript's been released. So you're basing this primarily on a whistleblower that hasn't been revealed and was never called forward to give testimony. And then there are certainly questions about that whistleblower in terms of the assistance the whistleblower got and his motivations. And so, frankly, for most Americans, they understand the fact that even the lowliest pickpocket or burglar gets certain rights in America. Among them is the right to be confronted by your accusers in open court. So the fact that the president's chief accuser, in this case the whistleblower, has not come forward creates a perception among a lot of Americans that the president has not been treated fairly or with due process, that indeed this is a political act and this is a political effort.
We don't even know the whistleblower existed.
Well, no. We do know the whistleblower's existence. We haven't published his name, but people do know and recognize who the whistleblower is because that name is circulated within Washington and in the media. So at the end of the day, I think that for the American people, again, like I said earlier, this doesn't really move the needle in terms of whether or not you support or oppose the president. There's nothing really significant to a point that would cause Republicans to say, oh my God, we can't support this guy. Because you have to kind of think back that, for 3 years, for all the things the president has done that Democrats have found objectionable, Republicans and independents and
That's
other
almost
Democrats,
true, yes,
could have left the president and not supported him. And there's a long list.
In other words, in the Democrat eye, he did nothing right.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you were going to not support President Trump because of some of his worst tweeting or some of the worst thing he said on the campaign trail or some of the objectionable things he's done, such as, the immigration issue or North Korea or other things, you would have already left supporting the president. The fact that you're still with the president after 3 years of all that's gone on, Mueller and everything else, this impeachment process probably does not rise to the standard of being able to convince you to not support the president.
And on the other hand, sir, the general public, for average Joes and the Sues, what they care for is a better economy, is a lower unemployment rate, is an active stock market, so on and so forth. America is now stronger than before. Those facts, when compared with the Clinton time, blowjobs are nothing because he did something better with the economy. So can we say that? Can that case be excused?
Well, I mean, like I said, and you appropriately put, I mean, the economy is paramount in people's minds. People want to be employed, especially, we're not that far removed from 2008, the mortgage meltdown. So, I think that in a lot of ways, Americans wish that the political debate in Washington was more focused on the issues that they have everyday concerns about.
You're right.
Such as, the proliferation of gun violence in America, which is still a dominant issue.
Yes.
The issue with the police, the relationship they have with their community, especially communities of color, the cost of health insurance, premiums, deductibles, and so forth, the high cost of drugs. The homeless issue here in California, 96%.
We have so many more important issues.
Yeah, 96% of Californians think that homelessness is now the number one issue in the state. So, there are certainly a litany of other things that we can be talking about. And I think Democrats would be better served by focusing on those issues. And if you're going to attack the president and the Republican Party, you should attack them on their liabilities on those issues, which are traditionally better issues for Democrats anyway.
All right. Thank you very much for that analysis. My last question, excuse me, I'm asking more than I should. Anyway, my last question. By Constitution, which gives the president the power of acting as the commander-in-chief of the whole United States, right? So is it right for him to use some leverage which will benefit the country, even in case of, terms of anti-corruption? For example, what I mean is that for somebody's son who has no knowledge of the oil industry and hired on board with a handsome pay, obviously something wrong, right? If you put me on a job like that, though, you know for sure, that's corruption because Jack Chow does not know that business, right?
Well,
so and then the president used this as a leverage to say, hey, you do investigation, I'll give you this the aid money.
I think it's important to understand a couple things from a historical perspective. Every American president has threatened withholding foreign aid against countries to try to get what they want. President Reagan, did it with aid to the Middle East, the Saudi Arabian arms package in exchange for human rights leverage. President Obama, the Iran nuclear deal in exchange for human rights. So, it's a tool of presidential power to use whatever is available to you, including treaties, agreements, arms packages, humanitarian aid, to try to motivate countries to do what you want. I mean, back at the height of the fight against the war on drugs and cocaine in the 80s, President Reagan threatened to withhold aid against certain Latin American countries that they didn't do more to interdict the flow of drugs into the United States, even though the United States was the problem because they were consuming all this stuff and creating the market. So every president does it. But in the case of President Trump, the Democrats are looking for anything they can to try to hang on him, to impeach him or remove him from office or hurt him politically. So whereas every other president has done this, when President Trump makes that
That's
offer,
a leverage.
Yeah, makes that offer, it's now objectionable. So, like I said, the rules of the game are such that Democrats can make whatever case they want and take it to the American people, and ultimately the American people will decide at the ballot box.
All right. In other words, we really have to trust the public, general public, right? We're way over time, but I really did what I can. I have so many questions unasked. Thank you very much, sir, for answering all the questions. Today with me is the big friend of this community, big friend of all our audiences, former presidential consultant for George Bush 41 and George Bush 43, now founder and CEO of Lee Strategy Consultation Group. And like I said, this is the busiest time for him, because with the election, all the parties needed his knowledge, his wisdom. Thank you for taking time to get to the answers to my audiences. Thank you very much.
Always good to be here, Jack.
All right. Thank you for watching, my dear audiences. See you next time.